Education, October 16th, 2018 at 7 o'clock p.m. Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Beatty Bar,
I'm here.
Blakely,
Here.
Dryden,
Here.
Gaspar,
Here.
Locke,
Here.
Lowe,
Present.
Dremel.
Here. Mrs. Locke, would you please lead us in pledge?
I would be happy. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Dr. Hitchens, are there any items to be added or removed from the agenda?
There are not.
All right, we are actually going to skip celebrating successes tonight because we have a heavy evening of reports. So we will jump right to public comments. If anyone wants to address the board, please make sure that you've gotten a pink sheet from Kathy Scafidi. You also have the option of doing written comments on a blue sheet. She can help you with that if you are interested. When you address the board, we ask that you come to the table so we can all hear you. We won't be entering into any discussion at that time. It doesn't mean that we don't take your opinions or comments seriously. If you would like further communication from a board member, please let Kathy Scafidi know, and the board or the administration will get back to you with your issue. We ask you to please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and I will call up the people in order who have given us a pink sheet. So I would like to invite Beth Doan to the table.
I have some concerns about the locker room situation. Title IX reads that no person in the United States shall be, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participating in or be denied the benefits of being subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal assistance. And I wondered if that included my daughter. My daughter is modest and is uncomfortable changing in front of her father or brothers. And I wondered if she could feel safe and comfortable to change in the girls' locker room or to go in the girls' bathroom. And what about her rights being denied? Other districts have accommodated male students that have identified as female students with their own changing area. And I do not understand how that affects their education exactly, is what I'm questioning. I understand if he is uncomfortable changing in the boys' locker room, but it isn't right to discriminate against the girls in the girls' locker room either. This affects all schools, elementary included in Batavia, as this is a policy. I have 8 children, and I adore all children, and I feel that every child should feel safe and cared for in the school district.
I'd like to invite Daniel Russo to the table.
Good evening. It's nice to be back. I'm Daniel Russo. I was the LRC director at Batavia High School for a long time. And tonight I'm here to just talk briefly representing the citizens for Batavia Public Library. It was 2002 when over 6,000 Batavians lined up to visit the new library when it opened on a beautiful January day. Since that time, Batavia Public Schools and Batavia Public Library have developed a really strong relationship. Programs such as One Book, One Batavia, summer reading, winter reading, Battle of the Books, early literacy programs, and more. It's interesting that over 250,000 visits happened at Batavia Public Library last year. So it's really having a huge impact on our community. As the building is starting to age, it's approaching 20 years, the library board commissioned a study of the facility and created a capital asset plan. It outlines the repairs that are needed for the next 20 years. And this is an opportune time for Batavia, for the library, because the construction bonds for the building will be paid in December of 2018. So after a community engagement project and a couple other studies that the library did, the library board voted unanimously to put a referendum on the November ballot. And that ballot asks voters to move the 7 cents that was going to construction bonds to operations. And that change is a zero tax rate change, meaning the tax rate won't change if people approve that. However, the library will be able to plan for its maintenance, complete the maintenance projects that must be done, and avoid delayed maintenance, which can be expensive. It also allows the library to build up a reserve fund and to maintain and enhance its programs. So on the library's website, you will find all kinds of information. A question and answer sheet, the entire capital assets plan, all of the community engagement sessions were filmed and they're on the website. So I would urge everyone to visit that website and to vote on November 6th. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dana. All right, now I'd like to invite Ted Swanson, PEA President.
Hi, everyone. First off, I just have a little personal message. I'd like to congratulate Myrtle Middle School for the cross-country team between boys and girls for doing their fantastic job at state. And a special person on that team is Quentin Lowe, who I had in 5th grade, who I'm sure at some point during his 5th grade career I must have taught him everything he knew about cross-country. He's been awesome. So just congratulations to all the cross-country teammates from middle school.
Amazing.
Something else that a little plug to put in for, just so you guys, if you're interested, our neighbors to the north in Geneva, the Geneva Education Association is hosting a trivia night, like we had our first one last year, and the proceeds go to their scholarship funds that they award. We are going to get together a team from the BEA to go and attend that, and if the board or an admin would like to be a part of that, I have all that information, and you can seek me out and I can get you the sign up for that. But it's Saturday, November 10th at 7 o'clock. So I have that information to share. And then the last thing that I have is just, it's kind of a message of hope. We have always had a really collaborative atmosphere here in Batavia between the BEA, between administration, between the board. And even though it might not be physically out there on what's happening, I really feel like our collaboration is getting stronger as each day and each week passes. And I'm just super excited to see where these next 2 years take us in my role as BEA president. And I just have to say thank you for everyone for trusting in the process. And the process is starting to show that it's working even better. So thank everyone for that. That's all I have.
Next we can do committee updates. Sue, do you want to start?
What about the student ambassadors?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're sitting over there. My mind's going ahead. We saw your picture today.
Yes, so it got approved by tech to move one of the printers into the library and also get the cloud print on everybody's Chromebook, which means that you can send it, your documents or whatever needs to be printed directly from your Chromebook to the printer to avoid having to log in on the device twice.
And an email was sent out to the whole student body that describes how to do the process, and it's really fairly simple, so that was a good solution to the problem.
Yeah, and I used it yesterday and it's significantly better. It's so nice. And then I've already had 3 or 4 English teachers approach me and just be like, thank you, because it was definitely something that was affecting multiple people in the building, and hopefully we provided some sort of solution to that.
That's awesome. That's great.
We're also hosting BPS 101 Pride.
Yeah, this week, that's us. And then at the end of this week on Friday, we're gonna make our own Twitter, the Ambassador Board of Education.
And promote it through that.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll be a good way to get additional feedback from the students that we can then bring here.
Yeah, that's great. Yours, sweet.
Yeah, easy.
Congratulations, that's a big win.
Thank you.
I'm just really proud of the way you guys handled it. I think you really
You came to Dr. Smith and I and talked about it, and you came up with a plan, and you brought it to the board, and you executed that plan, and the results were definitely in your favor, but I really think you guys did a great job with that.
Thank you.
I think you guys also have exemplified exactly what Todd was just talking about, that we problem solve where the problems are. We get the people who are being affected by the problems to be involved in coming up with solutions, because it doesn't make sense for the 7 of us sitting up here to try to go solve that problem. And I feel like we are getting really good at doing that from the top down, that we solve the problems where they're happening and we get the right people involved. And so you guys just backed that up in a really good way, so thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job.
All right, go study.
Midterms.
Midterms are coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All right, now let's go back to board member committee updates.
Okay. Me first.
You first.
Okay. I don't really have a lot, the foundation meets next week. So I do know that the foundation grant process is open now.
I saw that tweet too.
Yes, I saw the tweet, and I think just for informational purposes, it's always been known sort of as teacher grants, but it's pretty much open to anyone to apply. So PTOs can apply, clubs can apply, as long as the monies are going to students. And right, Lisa, I think anything that benefits the students of BPS 101. So if you're a parent, you can apply, as long as the money is going to something educational for the students of BPS 101. The deadline is February 8th of next year. I can't believe we're talking about things in next year already. But you can find out more information on bataviafoundation.org.
Thanks, Sue. I know we just, having had a meeting 2 weeks ago, we may not have a lot of committee updates. How about you, Chris?
I do not have a capital projects update, but we will be presenting something very soon about that. So. Big update coming up in the agenda items.
Right.
I was going to say soon.
Yeah.
Nothing, maybe next time, we have a meeting tomorrow.
All right, Bob?
Our next meeting is November 1st, so RAC has been responsibly allocating resources of team members, so trying to get our calendars figured out.
Okay, that works. John,
I don't have anything to report this time.
John, yes, sir.
The Hall of Honor is accepting nominations for next year. The deadline is February 1st, and there's a meeting tomorrow for us, so I'll know more after that. That's all.
And we're going to have a very, very interesting facilities committee report, so I don't have to touch on that. That was quick and easy. The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda, which is our way of taking one vote for a number of routine business items. All of the items are detailed in the board docs. So, Mr. Pierce, can you take us through the consent agenda?
Absolutely. 5.1 is the approval of our October 2nd regular meeting minutes, and 5.2 and 5.3 are the approval of the multiple closed sessions that we had on the same date. 5.4 is the shortest personnel report you'll ever see. 5.5, payroll and bills. 5.6, the destruction of our closed session recordings from April 18th of 2017. 5.7, we have a donation. The Dillon Foundation donated $4,500 for some dance team scholarships. You also saw 5.8, we have 10 different requests from Batavia High School for overnight field trips, ranging from, I saw Nashville on there, St. Louis, to beautiful Springfield, Illinois, I believe. 5.9 is the authorization to begin development of the FY20 budget, and then 5.10 is the approval of the consent agenda.
All right. Are there any items on the consent agenda for review or for clarification?
I just have a comment on the field trip request. And I find it very helpful to get them packaged like this.
Yeah.
It's very helpful to know the number of school days missed, who's going, etc. What I don't have on here, maybe we just don't have access to this kind of information, so how many students are affected. I just know as a classroom teacher, former classroom teacher, there's a big difference between 20 kids, missing a day throughout the school as opposed to say 300, and it affects a few more people. And if we had that data in the future, suggesting might be
Like an
something we could add on
We
there?
could give estimates, but we don't.
We don't, and I know a hard number can be tough because,
Yeah, when we do this again, we can definitely add that.
yeah, anyway, thank you.
It was nice altogether, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really is helpful.
If we haven't in the past,
We changed the board changed its procedures related to overnight field trips, so you weren't getting them one-off and sometimes approving them almost after
Well, I remember that.
they were happening. So our goal this year, according to the procedure, was to package them together by October 1st, or this is as close to that date as we're going to get, and then to present them to the board. You may get, things do come up,
Oh, yeah.
and we'll do those in one-offs, but we wanted to kind of streamline the process for the board. And you were seeing them well in advance.
I like it. All right, if there's no other questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second. I'm sorry, who said it? Is that Dryden? Moved by Dryden, second by Locke?
Yep.
All right, kids, could you please call the roll?
Lowe,
Yes.
Beatty Bar,
Yes.
Trumbull,
Yes.
Blakely,
Yes.
Gaspar,
Yes.
Locke,
Yes.
Dryden.
Yes.
All right, I'm sorry, I was chuckling because Olivia forgot her card. The next item on our agenda is a variety of reports, so I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Higgins, because I'm not sure who all is covering what.
Sure, I'm going to start by asking Sue to disconnect from the wireless so I can get ready for the facilities report. We have, the first two are reports that you see every month, the FOIA requests. We're required to show you what FOIAs have come in. And then the second is the treasurer's reports. If you have any questions about either of those, we can answer them for you now. All right, so starting in the second row there, in the back row, is the facilities committee. So I know that they introduced themselves last time, but we have more members tonight, and I know Charlie is also going to try to make it. But we'll start like maybe, oh wait, no, Joanne's not on it, so ignore the front row and the people on the left. Everybody else is on the facilities committee. And we'll start with Bob then, if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm Bob. I'm the associate principal at the high school.
Brian Swemke, principal at the middle school.
I'm Allison Liska. I'm the orchestra director at Batavia High School.
Nicole Prentice, principal at J.D. Nelson.
Kevin Callahan, Batavia resident.
Anne Marie Barnes, Batavia resident, and Louise White, third grade teacher.
Melanie Impastato, Batavia resident.
Mark Anderson, director of operations.
And as you know, Tony and I were also on that committee. Kathy attended most every meeting and she wasn't able to. Chris attended one, John attended one. So I think almost every time we had a board rep there as well.
There are a handful of other community members as well too who aren't here tonight.
Correct. Correct. So like I said, I think Charlie will be here and she had another meeting though. So if you see one more, you can direct all your questions at her. That's what you get when you come in late, right? The charge for the facilities committee was to develop a long-term master facilities plan for 2021 and beyond. And you heard Dan Russo talk about at the library how they have theirs for maintenance. And we do have the capital projects group that does come up with those plans. But this group had a slightly different bend in that we were trying to incorporate some of those projects that aren't normally considered during the course of their work. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the committee who is going to do the presenting. What we'll do, if you recall last month or 2 weeks ago, we gave you the preliminary, here's what you're going to hear. We talked about our process, how we got to this point, all of the different ways that we went in and did our analysis of the facilities and then the analysis of the data as well. So we set the stage last week. This time we're going to present those overall findings, give you our analysis and recommendations, and then turn it over to you guys for questions. If anybody needs more details, it's in the printed report and it's available for the public, so we won't go through every painstakingly detailed page, but we're going to give an overview and give you time to answer the questions. So I'd invite up to the front the people that are going to be presenting. Thank you to these volunteers. All right, we're gonna turn over to Mark.
All right, the next two slides you're going to see are about the overall findings. And you heard this, it's actually only 2 weeks ago, but there was a group, and we called them the A-Team. Basically 3 experts that went into the buildings to evaluate specific spaces. Actually, there was 250 spaces overall throughout the buildings. And as you can see on this chart here, most spaces that we looked at were satisfactory. That would be obviously in green. And then if you continue looking at the top, there are some that were ideal, and at the bottom there were some that were unsatisfactory. So really, I think what this chart shows overall is our facilities are in pretty good shape. They're satisfactory. And this band right here of the solid part is kind of, obviously, in my opinion, I think the opinion of most people on this committee is we would like everything to be ideal. That's not realistic at this point. Hopefully, we can work towards that. But what we really, as a committee, after these findings came back, focused on was the unsatisfactory piece. Next one. And then this one, the bars get much smaller, so probably a little harder to read. But this one breaks down each area. So there was an expert that went in and looked at each of the areas, so you can see safety and security, cleanliness, comfort, and functionality and productivity. Overall, 89% of the area is rated satisfactory. But really what we focused on, I was on both, so when I say we, I don't mean we as the A-Team, I was a member of that, and the facilities committee. But when the findings came back for the facilities committee, what we focused on were the 31 areas, the 31 areas were ideal, but the focus of the discussions were on the unsatisfactory spaces, and I don't know what the percentage of that was.
Unsatisfactory?
Unsatisfactory, 27 spaces?
It was about 10%.
10%, okay.
Right. We ended up lumping some of them together.
I know at our final meeting, we ended up putting a few together, so
Yeah.
27 probably was the number at one point.
Right. There were, like on that final list, it's 20 is the number.
Right, so 20 of them were the number.
But we did lump some together.
So that was the focus that we took as a committee to really kind of, all the discussions became on the unsatisfactory areas, and those discussions, obviously took a little while because, those are what we felt were the most important areas to try to work towards and try to bring to the board some recommendations. I think some analysis.
Well, almost exactly where he left off. Looking at all of the unsatisfactory areas determined by our A-Team, the committee feels that these are the most important spaces for us to continue looking at and working towards fixing. Note that 50% of the unsatisfactory ratings were actually classrooms and specialized classrooms. Specialized classrooms include art, music, family and consumer science, and outdoor learning spaces. Although, as Mark said, although we would like to see a lot more of the ratings leaning towards that blue ideal area, it's not necessarily possible for us financially to aim for everything to be ideal right now, but it would be more beneficial to move everything towards satisfactory initially.
Can I just ask a question for clarification? You talked about this specialized program, or spaces. What would be an example of the special program space? Just, do you read?
Special program? Oh, that's probably BTP.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure, okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I thought, yeah, I wanted to make sure, okay, thank you.
I could look it up, but then I'd have, you would also have to.
Yeah, just to double check.
That's what I wrote down, VTP with a question mark, and that's kind of what I was thinking, because.
Because then that would be more than 50%.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
He's gonna look that.
okay. Yeah, because it does make up a significant portion.
No,
And here are the 20 unsatisfactory areas by priority. If you take a look at, there's urgent and important, and then urgent but less important and urgent, and less urgent and less important. And less important doesn't mean we don't value that program or the space. It just simply means that the condition really doesn't negatively affect safety nor the classroom environment or learning at this time.
So the committee really feels that we've taken this project as far as we can, and it's really time to
The assessment team also was asked to kind of predict the financial implications of remediating any unsatisfactory spaces. And note that these ratings are based on opinions of the assessment team. And the facilities committee recommends that the board invest resources to hire professionals to provide an informed estimate and scope.
So as I was saying, we feel like we've done all the work that we can at this point, and it's time for us to kind of make some recommendations for the board. The first to address the spaces in the district that received unsatisfactory ratings that are really beyond the capacity and resources of the existing budgets and teams that we have. We feel that the students and staff at those buildings truly deserve to be in safe, clean, and functional learning environments. We recommend that the board approves to begin the RFQ process to solicit bids from firms to prepare professional estimates. Once this process is complete, Tony will be able to provide the financial implications to the board and how he can work his magic into the budget. And so knowing all of this, we'll also be able to help develop an improvement timeline for 2021 and beyond while being financially responsible but still meeting the needs of the district.
The second recommendation of the committee is to make progress toward modernizing our facilities. And this is a bit of a moving target, and one that we hope to make more progress on, but takes a lot of time. And to meet the timetable that the board had established, this is essentially as far as we got. We want to make more progress toward establishing those ideal spaces, knowing full well that not 100% of our spaces are going to be ideal, but we want to make progress in that direction, especially as learning changes. Our schools are very traditional in their construction, and a lot has changed since they were constructed. And no committee worth its salt would make a recommendation without recommending another committee. So our recommendation is that maybe you should do that. We should have another committee that focuses on what modern looks like. We know that modern has to be flexible and requires additional furniture and spaces that are really adaptable to changing needs, and that is a project unto itself. But further, there are some inequalities in the spaces that are available to our elementary schools, between elementary schools, and the condition of some of those spaces. They need to be addressed. PTOs have done extraordinary work over the years in supporting our students, but has left some discrepancies in terms of what resources and conditions that are available between schools. And lastly, we need to budget for improvements. The board has made significant progress toward budgeting and allocating resources to maintain our facilities, but it doesn't leave us much room to actually improve them. We make a distinction between the difference between improvements and maintenance. Improvements is maintaining a space and keeping it as it was designed, as it was intended. And improving that space adds capability, functionality, and really moves toward that ideal that spaces are kept modern and to our evolving needs. And we have very, very few opportunities to actually make improvements because typically at their cost. So that's the second recommendation in a nutshell. The last thing that we need to be thinking about is that this is, again, a moving target. Things change. We realized throughout this process that we need to be doing this assessment, this 18 assessment, needs to be done on an annual basis because conditions change. Projects might need to move up in terms of priority because of conditions as they evolve, or we might realize that instead of it being a higher priority, we can kind of push it back a little bit. So there's some flexibility here. Maybe some new conditions will appear where we need to identify some more projects. This is essentially a starting point. It's not an ending point. And in terms of the status of the facilities committee, they have effectively fulfilled their charge. I think there's a number of them who find this work interesting and are eager to continue to participate, and would be interested in participating in that second subcommittee that focuses on modernizing those spaces. But that work is going to be complicated, and it's going to be long-term, and it needs to be differentiated based on level, because how children learn in early childhood is very different than how they learn when they get to 12th grade, and all the different variations in between are pretty significant. So we've got our work cut out for us. We should be moving in that direction.
Actually, I just wanted to point out one quick thing is, it doesn't appear that this list necessarily encapsulates everything, all the big ticket items that we have out there. For example, on our capital projects list, we have 2 roof replacements, which are $1 million each, which I wouldn't expect you guys necessarily to get through a classroom walkthrough, but is something that the board needs to take into consideration when developing this plan, I think.
And so we focused on the capital improvements to the extent that we could, and not the maintenance.
Right, I'm just making sure that we're keeping that in mind as we're going through this process, because it's an
So we're
additional
not cross-coordinating those two things?
No, we are, but we didn't go and re-identify projects that have been already identified. And so that's the crux of it. It's one of the things that we really struggle with as a committee is what's the difference between a capital maintenance project and a capital improvement project, and how do they correlate? And that's really what instigated the whole need for the facilities committee, is because we had a number of capital maintenance projects that we didn't know if future capital improvements would kind of render them useless in a way. When we talk about some of these areas in particular, and we go through this analysis, we could talk about some of the mechanics of that. So for example, if you're looking at the HC Storm classrooms and the Louise White classrooms, those buildings were constructed, I think, in 1978 or 1979, right around that time frame, and they're aging. I think the roofs are original to the building. They need a lot of work, need things like tuck pointing. The entrances don't meet our security expectations anymore, so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The walls are failing too. They're aluminum walls. They're movable in the sense that you can rearrange them, but they've never been rearranged since the place was built. They literally hang from the rafters, the ceiling, these walls, and so moving them is not simple. It's not like a movable wall like this, but they're failing, and since they hang from the ceiling, they kind of wobble, and in some cases the doors don't shut anymore, and they're in very poor condition.
So if you wanted to move them, they just might come off, and then you're not going to be able to put them back on.
Pretty much, yeah. And in some cases, I know that Mark's team has worked extensively to try to make simple things as a door shutting and locking to just happen, and they just can't make it work.
Now, that seems to me to be a very urgent thing. But, so I need to ask, so it's, I mean, the way that you've prioritized this urgent, from what I can see is that what's under urgent and important are primarily security issues. Is that correct?
Yes.
Which the logic, I can understand it. I can understand it, but I also worry about it, movable wall falling.
They're not a safety issue in that sense.
So they're not a safety issue.
They're not going to hurt anybody. But locking doors is important, and it is a safety issue.
So that's a safety issue.
Yes, but it isn't necessarily as urgent as some of the other safety issues. So there's different degrees of safety. Not all safety issues must be addressed immediately, but safety issues were definitely high on our list. But to go back to the point that I was trying to make earlier in the interplay, when you look at the roofs and this particular project, we don't want to go and do tuck pointing and roofs on walls that might need to be rearranged. So there's a lot of overlap, and we want to make sure that we're not throwing good money after bad. So we want to do this in a way that is planned. We want a long-term plan. There's an order to this. At least foresee the conditions that might be at play when we make some of these investments, because many of them are significant.
So this is the big picture, looking down the road ahead of time, so that we're not just doing a bandit approach promptly and figuring out what needs to be done first, if it's safety and rearranging walls or whatever. Okay.
And then at the same time, also adapt for new projects that might come along and other conditions that may change as we go along. The 20-year plan is a plan, but it isn't written in stone. Things change, and so we want to make sure that we're that the board goes into this with eyes wide open in that sense that as our capital project plan changes from year to year, as conditions change, this is the best information that we have right now. We'll have better information tomorrow, but at least we have a process to collect it, to analyze it, and to plan and move forward.
Is this something that, going back to the money part, I'm sorry, I gotta bring it up, but going back to the money part on this part, is this something that down the road that you're looking at would be to be into our, what we're going to allow to be spent every year? Or are we looking at increasing that amount, or are we looking at maybe trying to go out to the public and asking for, let's say, a referendum on it, if we earmark it towards just construction or safety issues, and that's all that money can be used for?
There's two things, John, that you might want to probably, because I know you love to dig in, look at, but again, it all folds on each other. One is studying the finance options. How would we finance? But that has to be folded in with us deciding what are the improvements, tied in what capital maintenance projects we have to do, and we have to sort of layer them all on top of each other and make some decisions. So like there's a lot of things sort of happening concurrently. Like
No, I know.
Right. So I would agree. I think those are conversations we need to have about how assertive or aggressive.
Was that ever brought up in you guys' discussion on the money or anything, or you guys were just focused on the what was needed out in, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years?
I would say
We
that
looked at the facility, we looked at the facilities and said, that's for you to decide.
Okay,
I think the question's answered here is that we know that we have to do things like put roofs on and to give us more data to know that when we make those decisions, what other factors could be at play, and that we still have to figure out how to pay for it all.
Right, okay.
We don't really know how much some of these things are going to cost yet.
Right,
So
okay.
you are doing a request for proposals, correct, for the,
That would be the next step.
that's what we need to do.
That's the next step for us to do, is to hire an architect or architects to design in a high level, not like in a blueprint level, but a high level, do a design of these particular projects and then provide cost estimates. And when we have those, we can package these things together with the other identified capital projects and come up with a plan as to how we might get this done over the next 20 years. Some of these things are more urgent than others, and they need to be done sooner rather than later, but that's where the other component of this plan comes in.
And I think in that cost estimate too, the professionals will be able to tell us, it's more cost effective if you package these together than just go and do this one project. And again, from the last couple of years of the capital maintenance projects that have gone out to bid, it's been very difficult to find, general contractors come in to do small work. And when I say small work, I'm talking, $250,000 to $500,000 jobs. It's difficult to find them because those same general contractors are doing, unfortunately, $5 million jobs. So they'll also be able to tell you, it makes sense if you're looking to, add different classes in elementary school or different spaces like that. Well, if you're going to redo walls, well, you might want to redo the walls and do the tuck pointing and do some other things that are on this list at one time because it's going to be more cost effective.
Or conversely, it might be more cost effective to do that, but we can't, at least here's a plan how you can sequence these projects together so you're not building a wall one year and tearing it down next.
That's what we don't want to do.
So Tony, how long do you, if we go out for the proposals, how long before you even have those back? How long do we have to?
It would take a number of months to do that. First to write the proposal, then to give architects an opportunity to respond. Then once we give those architects an opportunity to respond, the board would have a decision to make as to which architect the board is going to engage and how much they're going to pay them to do that. And then after that, we would have the actual results of their work several months later, I would imagine.
So when would you imagine bringing something to us and saying, here's some proposals?
Here's some proposals. I would say the earliest that we could have proposals back to you is likely going to be January. if we worked, if we started tomorrow.
So when
I'm with you on that one.
Very optimistic.
You have to have optimism so that you can
Super
push
excited.
over, you know.
When you say architects though, are you saying we can go out from what we've been using?
Yeah, I think that's, you know, the best option, I think, for us is to, we have architects that the board, the White and Company is the board's current architects.
Right.
And they're good architects. However, there is a certain philosophy that we're kicking around in terms of, we want to hire architects that might not necessarily do this work for us. Meaning, we want to have one architect design it and cost estimate it, and have another architect actually draw up the blueprints and manage the work. Because that way, there isn't an incentive for architects to make these projects bigger than they need to be.
And also, we felt that narrowing down the scope to these 20 things, combined with maybe what the capital projects also needs, is not saying, here's our facilities, we have these 8 buildings, go tell us what we need to do. We really thought that this list would be helpful to focus their attention on just these areas. And they might, you know, note something along the way, this isn't perfect, but just not giving them carte blanche and saying, go into this building and tell us everything you would do to improve it. So we would say specifically, look at this, tell us what it would cost.
So just for clarification on what the scope is, we're going to include all the items in this grid, or are we just starting with the upper left-hand corner?
$3 sign.
When we did our RFP, we would put all the items on this grid, and we would have them give us line items in terms of cost for them to actually do the work, to estimate, design, do schematic design and estimate cost for us. And then we would choose which ones we were going to have them do based on that cost.
And then
not all of them.
And then we're also going to add into that the major items that are from our capital projects.
We may, where it's proven, we may do that too.
Okay. I mean, because obviously, if we leave out the roofs at HC Storm and come up with a plan, well, I think that may actually change the plan and the cost of other projects, for example.
All right, can I ask one more really crazy question? If we continue to have declining enrollment in the district, 10 years down the road, there's a possibility that we can mothballing one of these elementary schools. I know I'm not supposed to say this out loud. Is that something we're going to account for in these plans? Is that something that you would normally look at, or is that data that you wouldn't even consider when we go through these?
No, I think it's something that we would consider, especially when we're looking at costs. It gets tricky to do. We wouldn't want to mothball a school and have our projections not happen and come to light. You know, we can predict that enrollment is going to continue to decline, and all predictions are is it's going to continue to decline until it won't.
Until it doesn't, yeah.
Until it stops. And I got to believe that there aren't a lot of vacant houses in Batavia. I think the demographics, they're shifting in terms of ages and whatnot, as is the case all over the country, but we're going to level out at some point. Where that is, I'm not quite sure. But there isn't any very clear data that indicates we need to be mothballing the school anytime soon.
And you have to price it.
And I also think that by us doing, looking at inequities between the elementary schools, if we commission the committee and we start looking at what would we want ideally, that will help us to assess our buildings. If 10 years from now we find that that makes the most sense, we will have been talking about how our buildings look, which ones are closest to ideal, which ones can we spruce up the most, and which ones should we love. So, I mean, I feel like that's why the continuing conversation is probably good, because you're right, John, there's always the possibility that it could continue declining, and that is a conversation we might have to have. And we don't want to pretend it's not happening and stick our heads in the sand, but we also don't want to plan for it before we need to.
Okay, sorry.
Well, I wanted to say thanks, because I feel like this committee has given us a tool set that we didn't have before, and now we have, the A team, that evaluation, that buckets to put things in, and that's going to help us from today forward, something that can be molded, modified, etc. And my question was, when we're looking at, we know we can't be 100% ideal, but were there discussions like what a great looking ideal to not ideal matrix looked like, what percentage we were shooting for across the district for ideal? I just didn't know if it came up in conversation.
It did.
Yeah.
Anne Marie, were you gonna say something?
Well, I was gonna say, when we look at that satisfactory band, it's so large that maybe taking a look even of that satisfactory and saying, you know, ideal is a strong word. But that band of satisfactory was so large that, you know, we've got some that were close to ideal and some that were closer to, you know, needing some work. And honestly, I think once we take care of the reds, or we've got that going, then kind of taking a look at the greens and seeing, you know, in that area, maybe breaking that down a little bit. And we did have several conversations about what ideal looks like, but then we figured, you know, we need to turn it back over to you.
Well, if I was
great
having kids again, I would want them to go to ideal schools.
Yeah.
So.
Kevin and Nicole also.
Another thing is that when we looked at this, because we had problems at all the schools. So you could take satisfactory and you could substitute acceptable for that same word. Now, it may be on the lower end of acceptable or maybe on the upper end, but we didn't have the luxury of being able to assess, okay, should we just push it over the top? A year from now, like Tony was saying, it may go into a different zone altogether. So we couldn't really do that, but we looked at what it was going to take to get these projects at least addressed to the board, because yes, you have the two words up there were capital maintenance and capital development, which are very important, because this throws this back in your lap saying, okay, these are things that we saw as a committee. We're not the builders, we're not the professionals, but we all have interest in all the schools across the board. There was no favoritism, even though people thought it would probably be that way. It was pretty neutral when it came down to the bottom line. But if you take the capital development, capital maintenance, our survey, and looking at outwards of 10 to 15 years, because we discussed it also, of what is going to start falling apart, what is going to start getting where its life is over with, that you have to build in. Now, where the money is from there, we don't know. What it's going to take to get that, that's up to the board. But as far as the incoming students coming in, we had it also assessed. I don't think it's in your report there, but we did have it assessed from, what's her name, Laura, at the City of Batavia, giving us a housing survey of what was going on. And then I had another one brought in so we could see what was going on there. That gives you at least an idea of what's going on in the City of Batavia as far as what is out there available and how it's developing. So it's kind of putting a stamp on how many kids are going to be coming in, what's the declining enrollment going to be. We got a pretty good idea there. But we're not the designers nor the architects or engineers, so we couldn't say, but we were all on the fence with it. One would say, yeah, well, this is my school. Yeah, I think we could use this, and we understood it. But somebody else, the other one says, well, I could use this more. And this is coming from somebody who was completely neutral in the whole thing, but that was where we had the problems with. So we try to get it to where it was. As far as ideal, 100%. Yeah, aim for it. Why not? I mean, it's not gonna hurt. But if you have something to aim for, everything that's in green and red is eventually gonna go away. But we're going to do it in small pieces, like Dr. Hitchen said. You can't do it all at once, but if you do it in little bits and pieces, we came up with suggestions on how to do it from an outside look so that we're not putting all our eggs in one basket, or maybe it's better to do it that way as far as vendors and things like that. But that's for the professionals to do. That's why we had the 3 professionals that looked at this whole thing. And those are the people that are going to have to work with the architects and engineers, with the board, to decide what is the most important, what really is what they want. And in light of things that are going on in the school district right now in these schools, and I'm hearing it's like it's unbelievable. Yes, we do need this stuff.
One other thing Kevin reminded me about, there were, you know, we did get the reports from the principals, and they gathered feedback from stakeholders, teachers, and parents in their building, and they identified some things that they would like to see improved. And we had, not all of them made this list because we really had to prioritize, and we said, you've identified some great projects, and we might be able to find some way to, you know, make progress towards those, so you might see some other construction. This isn't those 20 projects that we put up there, those are not the only 20 things that will be happening. But we did have to think about it, and we had some really difficult decisions at last meeting to try to figure out what actually makes it to that final list, and a lot of the projects they didn't sink to the level of unsatisfactory, so unfortunately we didn't put them on the list. But we do know that there are some really good projects identified by the teachers and the staff and the parents, principals.
So I have a question just to see what our ultimate long-term goal is, and I'm of the belief that our long-term goal should be a master plan, ultimately, and it seems like we're on that path. If we put together a committee that comes up with the ideal scenarios of what we would like things to be, and we get architects looking at the cost of what some of the projects that we're looking at are going to be, I would assume that after that, we would start to venture down a road where we're putting together a master plan that says, all right, these are our short-term, immediate things that we need to address soon, but ultimately we want to get here, and these are all the projects that have to happen along the way. I want to make sure that if that's the direction we want to go, and if so, are we on the path that we're going to get there?
I think that when I look back at what we were charged with, it was to give you that plan, and we decided, like, we couldn't do that.
Right.
So what we gave you was the list, but then I think it is the next step to say, all right, the hope as a committee would be that those projects end up on a plan that, we'll help you put them on, rank them once we get the cost estimates, and we can help with that piece of it. And we're really a lot closer to forming that plan than we were. We didn't bring you the actual plan, but
Correct me if I'm misrepresenting, but I almost feel like a lot of the conversation ended up being that it's going to be a constantly evolving plan. Like, we can't put together one plan that we're going to be doing this analysis every year. We would like to put together some sort of benchmarks or some goals that we would like to be shooting for, but as things change, we don't want to be so tied into a plan that as education needs change, we can't adjust to it. So I think we realize there's not one plan. Part of our plan is that we're going to have a process now that we're constantly looking at this.
I think what we've offered you here is what needs to be done and how much it costs and when it might be done. That's yet to be determined.
Right.
By the way, Sue, the answer to your question on the special programs versus the specialized places, specialized spaces, excuse me, is indeed
The VTP.
VTP and DO.
That's what I thought it
It's
was.
special education programs, specialized special education programs. So technically, they're all instructional spaces.
I do have a question. Okay. I do want to thank everyone for being on the committee and putting in all your time, because I know it was a lot of time that you contributed and everything like that. I did know Mrs. Liska was on the committee because I got a text from Brendan one day. Why is Mrs. Liska touring the buildings? And who is Mr. Pierce and why is he teaching our class? I thought that was really funny. He taught orchestra one day while she toured.
Thank you, by the way.
I thought that was really funny. I'm like, just behave. That's what I enjoy. So, thank you very much for all your time, everyone. This didn't turn out to be quite what I expected it to be. I think I talked to Lisa about this, but it's very helpful information, and I think we're just going to take it for what it is. And like I said, it wasn't what I was expecting, but it's data, and I love data, so that's good. Do I have a couple questions? Are all the slides up here, or are these just a few of them?
Just a few. I can pull up the
Just a few,
report.
okay. The one, it's 2 after the circle, colored circles. So it's the list where all of them are with the check marks. It says unsatisfactory ratings by established standard conditions. And the first one listed is AGS Outdoor Learning Spaces Gen Ed. And every box is checked: safety and security, cleanliness and comfort, and functionality and productivity. Oh, there we go, okay. So to me, that seems like it's high priority, right? No? I mean, all 3 are checked there? Yes, no? Can you explain the rationale?
As I recall it, I think that was one of the spaces that was addressed as one of.
It's the one at the bottom right, the consider it. So
Yeah.
if that's our priority, that make sure that every building has an outdoor classroom that kids could access, then yeah, that would be something that we would need to.
So just
move up
because
in
it got
priority.
3 check marks, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a high priority.
Right, because we don't have to have students out, like, I don't believe students are going out to class right now in that courtyard. So,
Okay. So, and that's, the example is
not that.
the courtyard area. Okay.
Right.
But what would be an example of the safety and security in that courtyard? I mean, and I'm not trying to, I'm just looking for an example. What would you have considered the safety and security for that courtyard? I mean, like I said, I'm not trying to nitpick or anything, I'm just curious.
In there, it was identified as lack of cameras
Okay,
in that area, and then access to exit that area.
okay,
And that really was, there was one exit to get out of it.
okay. Just,
Yep, that was the safety and
okay,
security.
that's, I was, like I said. Now, if you go all the way down, the bottom one then is, well, second to the bottom is the stadium, and all 3 were checked there. And again, that leads me to believe that that's a high priority too, but yet it wasn't considered a high priority.
It's not negatively impacting the classroom environment, like
So
the
it's the
learning environment
classroom.
right now. So that's why it had to fall down, the direct impact on student learning. That's why the stadium
So
is
it's
at the
just
bottom,
student
on the
learning
bottom
we're
row
looking-
instead of.
Okay.
We
All right.
use this grid
That's
is, looks at urgency and importance is its relevance to
Student learning.
student learning
Okay.
or safety.
See, I'm looking at safety.
Yeah.
I guess, to me, my concern is
But
safety.
not all safety issues are, just because it's a safety issue doesn't mean it needs to be,
Okay, no, and then I'm just trying to figure this out, that's all.
there's different gradations.
That's okay. I'm just trying to figure out where you guys were at, so we're all on the same page. Then, under the $3 figure, we'll call it $3.
Yeah.
Don't we all wish it was $3?
That was some.
I'd pay for it if it was $3. You talk about the HC Storm and the Louise White classrooms. Are we talking about all the classrooms? No. You're doing, okay. So a handful, give me an idea.
2 pods.
2 pods. Okay, because those are the pod ones. Okay. Because 1 pod is good, 1 pod is not good. I mean, I'm just curious. Yeah.
Well, there would actually be C pods in both schools, were an addition, and the same walls weren't.
Okay. Okay. There you go. All right.
And right now, we're talking about, as far as doors not locking, there are 3 doors that don't lock.
Okay.
So it's not like all the doors don't lock, however, in the
But that's a
future, you don't
concern.
know.
Oh, yeah,
That's
no,
a-
and again, safety is a huge concern, and I get that. So that's where I'm just trying to understand what this is
And
about.
the way those are built, fixing one door could make 4
The
others.
4 others not work, exactly, yeah, no, you mess with one, then the others are gonna, no, I get it. And then, a couple of times now tonight, the inequities among schools have been mentioned. Can we talk about what some of those might be? I mean, do we want to, is that what we're?
Well, I think
Yeah.
what the A team found out was that the satisfactory band was really wide, so they didn't really come up in their analysis, but once we say, here's what an ideal classroom looks like, and then we go from building to building, we'll probably notice more, or this is what an ideal LRC looks like, and then we'll probably notice more, but since all the LRCs were satisfactory, there were no inequities there. So when we're just using that wide satisfactory band, we didn't notice a lot of inequities. But once we say this is what an ideal LRC looks like.
So if you set a standard and go school by school.
Right.
Then you would.
Right. And we'll be able to see how many classrooms have been modernized and maybe in one building.
Right now, it's more anecdotal. We
Mhm.
know there's
Okay. So
differences,
there's
but
no
we did not
actual-
quantify it.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, not all the elementary schools have an outdoor learning space. So that would be an inequity. Or something like that. Okay.
Or the classrooms themselves. If you looked at one school as another, and it was mentioned earlier, like the PTOs and all that help, bringing things in, of course, it help out, but we wanted consistency in a classroom as far as the furniture, desk, and everything else, so that the children going from one school, let's say into the middle school, up to the high school, there was a certain amount of uniformity all the way through. So it wasn't like it was a hodgepodge of stuff, plus getting rid of things that weren't needed in those rooms, just cleaning it out.
One other question, and this may be to you, Marguerite, me, you, Tony, like, again, safety, big issue, and there was talk of like, the playground areas and things like that. And maybe, can't really talk about, but has safety on the playgrounds been addressed? Was that part of what the discussion was? And,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, playgrounds were a part of it.
okay. Because I know that was mentioned there and just want to make sure that's being addressed. This is kind of like a
Mark,
wider
what
is
range.
Yeah, so there, actually, and you'll see on this, in one of the quadrants, the yellow quadrant,
Yeah,
the playgrounds for
I
McLean
saw
and Hooverwood are on the list. They're not dangerous, but they're,
but it was safety, right? And so,
it's just the condition of the playgrounds. They're not unsafe.
well, I guess that was my question, maybe, like safety, was it,
It's,
the equipment safety?
It's not safety in that sense. If they were unsafe, we wouldn't let kids.
right, okay, but it's more safety.
No,
Ending
it's
their
not about
useful
safety. They're at the end of their useful life. They're safe playgrounds, but
Okay,
their useful life is ended.
okay.
Mark, I have just one question on this one, and I was just kind of concerned on it, or it says limited power sources for Louise White. Does that mean you can't get enough power into the school to use it, or is it inside the school itself that doesn't have?
No.
What were you
I think
trying
that's
to
in-
get at?
I believe, if you're talking Louise,
It
yeah, I
said
think
LWS, limited power sources.
it's probably in LRC or in maybe possibly some classrooms because of the walls,
Okay,
because they couldn't run.
but you could get more power into the, okay, okay.
You could, yeah.
Is it because of the Chromebooks maybe? Or,
I don't know the specific reason on that, but I do know from at least at Louise White, because of the number of outlets, because of the
Well, I know
walls.
it's an older, one of the older schools and all that, and maybe at the time there wasn't enough stuff to go in, and so I didn't know if that's what that meant.
So the movable walls would
It's the wall.
preclude the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to move a wall with power.
Who invented the pod?
Seems like a bad late 60s, 70s
Yeah.
kind of.
I think that, again, for each of the committee, they really did, not only did they show up to all these meetings, but then they also gave feedback on all of these drafts along the way and really have put in a long time and deserve their break from the committee for a little while
Before
the
they
board
come back.
hits the reset button on this project. And I think that if it's okay with you, we'll have Tony and Mark start to at least put those RFPs together so that you know what you're talking about when you're prioritizing, whether or not, like, you know, you have to spend money to spend more money, but we have to spend the pot of money first to figure out how much the second pot will be. So I think we should get started on that unless I hear objections, because that won't cost us money yet, right?
Yeah.
Yet.
So when do you see coming to us with our next?
Well, we haven't started that work yet. We did all we could to get to this point, so we've done some preliminary discussions and planning as to what that would be, so I don't have definitive timelines for you. I would tell you that the very earliest that we could have something back for you to approve would be January of that.
Okay.
Much to my
So can I get a clarification?
An optimistic estimate.
If we spend money now to figure what this is, what are we actually going to, would we see like a finished product for all the buildings? Is that what I'm just trying to get, if we're gonna spend money now on put something out there, I just wanna know what's gonna come back to us.
Well, really, at this point, we're not spending any money until you see something else. And what you're gonna see is basically, when you put an RFQ or RFP out, request for proposal, you're gonna see what, however many architectural firms and engineering firms think doing the projects that are listed up there, the 20 projects, are gonna cost. And depending on how much information to get us. So then, the next step after that, if you choose, is then to actually get those projects designed, where that costs money.
Okay.
Now, how much money, at that point, we'll be able to tell you how much money that will be.
Okay.
Do we need to authorize a subcommittee? We were talking about a subcommittee.
Yeah, are you ready for that, or are you not?
Yeah.
The sooner we start, the better off we'll be.
Is there any reason that we wouldn't wanna?
No.
Get them started?
Anyone? Is that going to bother Tony?
Again, we did everything we could to get to this point. We haven't had any final discussions yet about any of that stuff. So we're not even prepared to, tell you exactly what that looks like yet.
So we can bring that back, like
Yeah, that's right, what are the
a
next steps?
Yeah, we'll bring back like just like we had what you charged this committee with. We can bring something back next month for you guys to talk about what you might charge this next subgroup, what their responsibilities would be, what's their purpose and what are their responsibilities. And then we'll look for volunteers.
So don't run off.
Don't change your email.
Like an official tally of how many times we asked Tony when you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
March
Right, I'm sure we'll see each other.
Oh, March.
The next thing that I will talk about is, again, kind of an extension of the facilities committee. I know Chris and Tony helped me out, but I want to say it was like fall of 2016 that we really started talking about having a facilities type committee. Because we're at a point where there's plenty of capital maintenance to do. And to be honest, there's always capital maintenance because, when you have a million square feet and, acres of land and things like that. So we're continuing to charge forward, as you can see with the report that you should have gotten from me. We have an FY 2020, and really that didn't change much from when I was here, I believe last December. We're trying to get this process sooner and sooner because of, getting projects out to bid. That's really our goal of the Capital Projects Committee, is trying to get everything at least a year ahead of time and actually even more than that. So just some highlights here to show you some of the things that are on here as a continuation. The RMS athletic entrance was on there. It's on there again. As you can see, the price went up a little bit, but the price went up a little bit because of what we found out from the RMS main entryway. So that number's hopefully very accurate at this point. The changes that need to be done. Obviously, the main one is the safety. The doors are, failing. That whole entryway is failing. Some other things, though, as we start looking at this, is there's other things that can be added to this project that make sense. And really, what we want to do, and when I say we, I've already met with the middle school and our architects at this point, because you really have to start planning, even though you haven't approved this yet. Again, John, it's not costing us anything at this point, but we're at least starting the conversations. We really want to tie those two spaces together. So the main entryway and the athletic activity entryway. So it's not like you're going in, you're going into two different spaces, but try to tie them together so they look similar. You don't want two spaces that look completely different. So that's kind of the goal at that point. And then the next ones that you see on the list are the HVAC controls. That's a continuation. We split those up into 2 fiscal years. Rotolo, Louise White, and Storm were done this past summer. Now this would be completing the entire project. So our controls are up to date. And when I mention controls again, we'll review, that's controlling the heat and the air in the buildings. And actually a little bit more than that, it's lighting as well. Some lighting will be built into those controls. And then the other one that's kind of a continuation is the projector update and refresh. So that is to complete the rest of the schools. This past year, the East Side Elementaries were done, and this is to complete the rest of them.
And just stepping back to clarify the HVAC controls, that allows us to actually control individual classrooms.
Correct, thank you.
So we're actually going to save a lot of money
Right.
versus...
Yeah. So for instance, if there's a Boy Scout or Girl Scout troop in a building at an elementary school, we don't have to run all the classrooms as we did in the past. Now it's one room. And we've actually, in the programming piece of it, we've actually identified some of those rooms meaning they're by a bathroom and they're by an exit. So then kids, adults, whoever are not walking through the entire building, they're just going to, the closest area. The rest of the things on for this year are just a continuation of, really it's gonna end up being probably a 5-year plan of updating the maintenance district vehicles, which we do have three new ones at this point. So each year just to, continue to do that, so, we don't have any more 2003, 2004 vehicles. And then kind of looking ahead, and again, what the Capital Projects Committee was kind of waiting for is the Facilities Committee to make those decisions. So some of this we'll be able to hopefully get more clarity in our next discussions. Some of the things on for 2 fiscal years from now. Again, a lot of capital maintenance, but the one thing we did talk briefly about tonight was some playgrounds. We went ahead and budgeted that because of the assessment that was done, and we knew those playgrounds were the kind of the top 2 on the list. And yes, playgrounds do cost that much. There's some other things that showed, just because of the work we get done, which is preventative maintenance. High school, the gym floors at the high school, we had those, not, when I say refinish, I don't mean, stripping them down, but it's basically putting another coat on. They had to replace so many boards. At this point, it's getting to the point where it needs to be ripped out and updated. And, like anything else, if you don't do that, yeah, you can continue putting Band-Aids on it, but then you get to the point where it gets into safety things as well. There's some other things on here. Myself and Don Seawald have worked together to get some of the tech projects into this as well. And so you see, some wireless updates, and then voice and phone servers. And then if you get out even a few more years, you're going to see the roofs are still on there. I really think the roofs are going to get to a point where we also need architects and engineers to come in. These numbers, to be honest, are old. They're old numbers. These numbers are for, the typical 40-year roofs. Technology's changed a lot even since these numbers were done, so we might need to relook at that. So, any specific questions you have?
As Mark mentioned, in the past, we've had technology projects included in here, but they weren't necessarily all of them, and we're making an effort so that all capital projects, wherever there's a significant capital outlay, that fits the criteria are in the capital project schedule, so there isn't this one-off thing. And that way, we're managing all of our capital projects together, because that wasn't necessarily the case in prior years.
So some of technical stuff is coming in here.
Yeah, so you'll see the projector refresh, which was there last year, but wireless, I think phone was there last year, but wireless wasn't. So there were a number of other capital projects that were related to technology that for some reason hadn't been integrated into this particular schedule.
Like server upgrades that we did like last spring and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it would be like random, like, yeah, there's some server upgrades, but it's, they're in their capital, but they're not in the capital projects list. I'm not really sure why, but that's just how we get it.
So the objective is eventually get all those in there that pass that threshold of becoming capital.
Yeah.
I like it when Don comes every month. Ask for more money.
Yeah,
Right. It's so tedious.
He doesn't really ask for more money, he's just telling us he's spending it. It's part of his budget.
No, it just makes me do it.
Or that's it.
That's even better, right?
You go ask.
He's gonna be home tonight. So actually, I don't know that that's really, because normally it's like 1.5 budgeted. At least that's what it's been.
No, we actually changed that.
Well, it's a keen observation, so last year it was 1.6, because it was up from 1.5, and then with the lighting project,
With
the
the lighting,
savings from the lighting project, there was another $200,000, and that was our recommendation
So we're
last
about
year.
it back in, okay. So we're about, okay. We're about okay.
Yeah, but there's still no guarantee these numbers hold out
Oh, no.
that far, right?
No.
We're gonna see, technology's gonna get more costs.
Well, yeah.
See, I felt like
It's
he was
Don's
saying there was a
fault.
negative on the roofing, but I felt like maybe roofing technology getting better means
Right.
it's cheaper.
Yeah, it could be cheaper,
Sure.
I
completely.
didn't think
It could be.
until I.
I've always found that to be the case.
I mean, there's another thing,
Because cars are cheaper than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
there's another thing to look at that, you know, depending on where the discussions go with other things at those two schools, meaning Louise and Storm, if you package all of those together and put them out to bid, again, for the most part, the prices will be better than just doing, you know, one single project at the school. So,
Excellent, get on it.
right, all over
Way
it.
to sell.
Something else that we may want to consider once we get numbers back is this, 1.8 that, or 1.75 that we've been targeting may be considered lower than what we actually need to achieve our goals. And that, to the best of my knowledge, we just kind of started at 1.5. I don't know if that's arbitrary or if there was a reason that we were there, or if that was just what we had left.
It was
But if we want to have a long-term plan, we might want to make sure that this number actually reflects our goals rather than.
Well, and that was kind of on the facilities report too, we talked about, if we're gonna do improvements and how
Right.
that all folds in. A good conversation with teachers.
All right.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Lynn.
And now for some updates about what's going on inside of our buildings, we're gonna turn it over to Dr. Newkirk for the
Sure.
rest of the reports.
The first report is an annual report about our English learning program as required by board policy. We still have a small program. We have about 200 students in our that receive EL services. Those services are of two different kinds. So it's TBE and TPI, and if you don't want to live in acronyms, that's bilingual education. And then it's also ESL, English as a second language. So we have those 200 students are in those two programs within our district. This report gives you an update. Programming, we continue to always make tweaks to our programming to better serve our students and the different languages that they speak, the 28 different languages that are spoken within the district. One of the major changes is in funding, so you can see that towards the bottom of that report, is that we used to have a grant that the state of Illinois issued for TBE and TPI, and that was removed and then put within the evidence-based funding formula. We still spend money on these programs. They didn't miraculously not cost any money, but it's just a different funding source that's being used for that. Any questions about the EL report? The next report is the guidance report, and this is again an annual report as required by board policy. So the two counseling programs, both at our middle school and high school, put together a report, and it is kind of a laundry list of the things that they do. They are very busy people. But really, if you take a look at it, this aligns with the ASCA model that the counselors follow. But we're also going to start to talk with the Board of Education about the PACE. This is a new framework that the state of Illinois has adopted, which impacts counseling programs. So PACE and transitional math is on your agenda for next month, something to look forward to talk about that, because it does have an impact on our counseling and advising programs, both at the middle school and high school. So Joanne and I will talk to you about that next month. So that's super exciting for you to hear about. But our counseling program really takes a look at the needs of students and then tries to program for those needs. And the needs are varied. So some students were dealing with issues related to suicide, and others about getting into college, and sometimes the same kid. So it really is very diverse, and you can see here they do a lot of great work for our kids. Any questions about that report?
Yeah, they're doing amazing stuff.
This was very good information because I was approached by a community member 2 weeks ago, last week, with some questions about what's being done in schools. And I was able to, I said, we've done quite a bit, but I was able to direct them to this report.
Great.
And I said, we've done quite a bit, actually. Here you go.
The final report that I'm going to talk to you about just briefly is because at the end of this month, the school will issue, the district, you will approve at your meeting, I think on November 16th, you'll approve the school report cards. But they're going to go out at the end of this month, whether you approve them or not. So I don't know why they asked you to approve them, but we're going to put out the school report cards as required by the state of Illinois. And the school report cards will be different this year because of the state's implementation of ESSA. So I'm going to give you a brief primer on ESSA so that you have some background. So when we talk about results very briefly next month, that you have some background information and can know what we're doing here to play catch up with the state. So really, the 1965 law is still in effect, but it was reauthorized a couple of times. If you've been in education, you're probably well aware of the No Child Left Behind Act. And while that had very lofty goals that all kids can learn and things that we really believe, the implementation of that was oftentimes what really got us into some trouble. So then ESSA, under the Obama administration, was authorized in 2015, and the state went into a planning year. So really the main features of ESSA, that federal legislation, was to push down to the state level the development of these improvement plans, and then to make sure that we were still addressing the equity issues that are addressed in No Child Left Behind and in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So really their focus was state level work and equity work, which is why we test all kids, we look at subgroups to focus on equity for all kids so that kids don't get lost in the shuffle or in averages, and then really to make sure that the states were going in a direction that they wanted to innovate in. So the state of Illinois put in their plan in 2017, and it was approved by the Department of Education in 2017 as well. The state's plan on the right side of that graphic you can see is really built around some very noble goals of making sure that we have kids on track to be successful throughout K-12 education. And really the state is trying to rewrite that not to be K-12 education, but P20. So making sure that we have a system that goes from preschool through college for all kids, that they can access that. So the goals within the state's plan, again, are really great. We can really believe in those, and there's much more research in the state's plan this year. But again, it goes to goals versus implementation, and I'll talk about that here. As the state went through the process of listening to its constituents as they developed their plan, there were certain requirements that the state had to meet, but they did have a lot of leeway. BPS did give feedback along the way. They had listening posts and feedback sessions. They had 3 drafts of their plan that they put out that the public reacted to, and we made sure that we read each one of those and provided feedback. We even did that with the other districts in King County to leverage the number of students to hopefully get our voice heard by the state. There were some very stark differences between the 3 draft plans and what was finally submitted to the federal government for approval. So people felt that while there was a lot of listening, that there were some changes at the end that people were not expecting. And I just listed some of the things that we advocated for. It may not mean a lot to you, but you need to know that we were trying to advocate for the best plan possible. One of the requirements in the law was that it's not just one test score, but you have to use multiple factors in order to have your state accountability system. So this is the accountability system for K-8 schools. You can see that they started looking at results using 2016 data. They gave us some preliminary proficiency data. So math proficiency, ELA proficiency, those are based on PARCC results. ELL proficiency, again, is based on PARCC results and access scores. There's a very complicated formula to say what proficient is for them. They have 5 years to gain language proficiency. And then chronic absenteeism, and then academic growth. They use a linear growth model to judge academic growth. So you can see that pie, there are some shaded out parts This is because the designations that will be attached to our schools at the end of October are still incomplete. Some of the metrics either don't exist or they are not going to put them in the label that they attach to our schools this year. Most of the indicators that they have up there grayed out, they gave us all of the points that were possible. So they're not trying to punish us with those things that they don't have finished yet, but they will phase them in as they are ready. So these are the K-8 indicators. You can see that 50% of the points come from growth, which again is a great thing, that we judge kids on growth, not where they are, not that they've reached this far, but that they have grown. John?
Okay, I just question how they're collecting that data. I remember under the old, so we're tracking every individual kid?
Yes.
And we're reporting growth on every individual kid?
Yes, on PARC scores.
On the PARC scores. Is that what's being tracked? Is that the data that we're reporting here?
Yeah.
Okay.
For the growth, that's the growth on that test.
We don't still have these old No Child Left Behind subgroups anymore?
We
Or
do.
we still have those?
Yes, I'll get to that in just a second,
Okay.
because they're even expanded, even more.
So there's more?
There's more subgroups, yes.
Okay.
So we look at this this accountability system looks at all kids, but it looks at anytime you have over 20 of some subgroup, and I'll go through the list of the subgroups, they will also be looking at those. Under the high school, there's a different 20 kids at any size.
Small.
Yep, small numbers. So the high school looks very different. Because there's not a growth metric that's available at the high school, because the state doesn't do PARC testing, they do SAT. They'll eventually probably get to a growth metric using SAT, but right now that's not available. So the biggest piece of the pie for high schools is the high school graduation rate. We have a great graduation rate, so I'm happy with that so far. They look at ELA, math proficiency, ELA proficiency, ninth grade students who are on track to graduate, because that's a research-based component of that, and then a chunk for chronic absenteeism is in both models. So those are the pieces of the pie. Again, there are pieces that are not in existence or incomplete at this time. They're not holding us to those. They've typically given us the points for those things.
All of the shape's going to change when they introduce those,
Yes.
right? Okay.
You're probably going to
It's just this year.
just lose them. So the state accountability system really boils down to labeling schools with one of four categories. And it's not districts, it's schools. So each school of ours will get one of these four designations. And if you think about it, let's look at the top. The top is where you are in the top 10% of all schools. So it's a normative thing. So if someone else gets a little bit better score, you could be pushed down into commendable.
Even if we're doing amazing things.
Yes. So exemplary is the top 10%, which means that you have high graduation rates, you don't have any subgroups that meet the thresholds. On the other end is the lowest performing, and these are the lowest performing 5% of all schools within the state. And when they look at the lowest performing 5% of schools, they actually use that number for the rest of the commendable and the underperforming. So they look at how the lowest performing, how are they doing in each of those subgroups, and then they set a benchmark or a threshold that if you are equal to or lower than that in any subgroup, then you would be labeled as underperforming. And you can see the list on this, that it is both ethnic groups would be subgroups, but it's also low-income students. Again, these are things that we've seen before under No Child Left Behind. Students with disabilities, new categories such as students who were in special education but are no longer, ELs who were in EL but are no longer. 504s is another category that they don't even have listed up there that they said will become subgroup. So there's an expanded list of subgroups. So if your school has 20 or more of these students, and their performance on that whole wheel of things falls at or near what the lowest performing are, you would be labeled as underperforming.
Are they given the same assessments? I mean, the park, for example, the park assessment, every subgroup, are the kids who are English as second?
Yes, you're all getting the same
Everybody's getting the
assessment
same test.
in English.
So based on this, we're gonna have some underperforming.
Our schools have subgroups, right?
Yeah.
We have large, especially, middle school and high school, we have large schools, you're gonna have 20 of almost all of these categories. Some of our elementary schools, most of them have subgroups, not in all of these categories. So that is that underperforming category. The other category is commendable. And again, that's where you don't have any subgroups that are underperforming and you have the high graduation rates and you've met those metrics. So this is the process that the state's going to use to rank and sort our schools. In the plan, there's, if you think that might be toxic, in 1920,
Well, it is. It
No,
is.
that's what you're saying, but it's
it
gonna
gets
get
worse. It gets worse. So in 1920, they will also label your school with an A through F grade. And then there's potential of, within your category, of getting another grade. So if you're within the exemplary category, you might get another grade compared to those like schools. So we're hoping for some changes there. We've advocated for those changes. I think a lot of people are not happy about that. So we'll continue to advocate in that direction. But this is a reality that we're going to need to deal with because it's coming at the end of this month. I believe our schools are great. I have, the utmost faith in our staff. Our kids grow here in Batavia. Our internal metrics show that. I'm very hopeful for our schools in terms of doing this, but it's a very complicated, very new formula that the whole state is going to be adjusted to. And I don't want, if we did have an underperforming school, I don't want the public perception that it's failing.
Right, that's, putting my work hat on, that's a communications issue at that point.
You would think we could come up with a different word.
Sorry. Sorry.
Education system besides underperforming.
Yeah.
There's gotta be something.
Well, you could also be like an exemplary D is what it sounds like too, right?
Potentially.
Yeah, D or F, sorry, I was.
Right, yeah, that's.
So that's a nightmare to have to explain to a community as well.
Yeah.
And part of the hard thing, and this is the next two slides here, is to talk about this means that we have to educate the public and our staff about this, but then things are changing. So what I'm telling you now will not be the same thing that I tell you next year at the same time.
Awesome.
Because the system is changing. Other indicators are being layered on here. So that's been part of why we've delayed these conversations, is because we're literally in webinars learning about this and then coming out here and talking to you. So we're really learning alongside you because the system is really being built and implemented on the fly. Which brings me to kind of our next steps that we're taking, and I would appreciate any feedback, is that tomorrow, perhaps, we will get some initial school designations, and then they will give us drafts of the report card on October 30th, of what will go out to the public the next day on the 31st. So this is coming. And then we're going to meet back here to talk on November 13th. I was mistaken. John?
No, I thought you were telling me we had 1 day notice.
We'll see that.
1 day before we get it, and then
The designation will come hopefully tomorrow. I'll get a designation, but we won't see the full school report card as it's going to be presented to the public until the day before.
So you get 1 day.
So we have 24 hours to analyze the data.
We have most of the data, but how it looks, how the public will see it and perceive it is something that we can't really plan for at this time.
Right, we had windows to look at the data and make any changes that we
Yeah.
felt if something was incorrect. But now that they're showing us these snapshots, we can't go back and change the data. They're saying we're just showing this snapshot. We really don't have a recourse at this point, but.
So our goals are really to educate. You might have seen a version of this presentation if you read my email and watched my video. It's very engaging stuff. So to educate our stakeholders about this new system is going to be a challenge, but something that we need to do. The other thing is we need to tell our story. The state's going to tell the story that they're going to tell, but I think that we're going to tell the story about our schools. We are, there was a wheel of things that they're looking at. Our wheel is much broader than that. And the board has been very clear, and our staff has been very clear, that we're more than a test score or a proficiency score. We are a lot of things, and we just have to communicate those things to our public. So we're going to keep communicating about that and coming up with some new systems. We also need to build and refine our data systems because we ship a lot of information to the state of Illinois. We don't necessarily see the results of that, but the report card is a good example of, we want to make sure the data that we're showing people is clear and accurate, and we're shipping so much of it to the state that it's really hard to make sure that it's of high quality and that we all understand it. So we're going to build and refine some of our data systems in order to do a better job at that. And one of the things that I said both in the screencast that I sent out is Batavia schools are strong. We can definitely get better. And I don't think there's anybody who works in this system who would say we've arrived. There's always another destination, and that's our belief in continuous improvement. And the best thing that we can do is to keep our focus on the really hard work of teaching and learning. If there were some magic pill, if there was some new program to bring in, we would have done that already. We're way beyond that, but the hard work of teaching and learning happens every single day in our classrooms, during every institute day, during every PD session that we have with our teachers. That is the hard work, and that's the work that our staff is engaged in, and we try and support them in that work, and that's what we really need to remain focused on. The school report card will come out, we'll communicate, we'll do those other things, but really my goal is to keep our staff focused on teaching and learning. So, yes, Chris?
Beyond communication concerns, what are the consequences of this report card? I mean, is monetary, whatever.
There'll be a lot of paperwork that goes along with those designations.
Okay, other than that, there's no real consequences as far as funding or?
No, you get actually additional funding if you're in a tier 3 or a tier 4, but I'd rather stay out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't need the government then.
And it's not a lot of money.
Brad,
That was a little bit longer than my podcast, so I apologize.
the preliminary,
My podcast.
ranking, what do we call it, preliminary
Designation.
designation, is that something that you would be comfortable sharing with us, or is that something that?
Yeah, I can give the board an update once we know of that. I'll notify our schools too about their designations.
That'd be awesome. That'd be
But
great.
I am very hopeful that we will have schools in the top 2 categories.
Okay.
That's how we roll.
Well, the subgroups, it's the worst of the No Child Left Behind Act, but you kept it. And I have always been convinced that when you disaggregate this to that extent, the point is to make schools fail. And I'm not sure why they kept that in, as opposed to reporting an aggregate. I don't understand.
I find it frustrating too, but I'm going to try, I'm not a glass half full type of person. That's not my natural bent, but my glass half full. You didn't know that? My glass half full on this is that it does get us to look very carefully at small populations that can get hidden in data. And I think that whether you're 20 kids or 15 kids in a school or 300 kids, you deserve good programming, right? So we have 200 EL kids, 217 EL kids, they deserve really good programming. We have a small program, in the data aggregate, they would get washed away because it's 217 kids out of 5,000. So I do believe that the equity piece is good. Some of the punitive implementation measures, that's where I think that philosophy and implementation start to rub together a little bit, which is one of the reasons why No Child Left Behind, our schools did eventually fall into failure or being labeled as failure because of the escalating kind of piece there.
Right. was inevitable.
Yep.
For everybody. Yeah. Okay, happy days.
All right, thank you, Brad. That is all of our reports for the evening. The next item on our agenda is administration comments.
Speaking of exemplary schools, did you know that October is National, maybe it's the statewide Illinois Appreciation Month, October. We appreciate our principals during the month of October. And I hope that they know how
I
much
did know that.
we appreciate them. And if I did have a message for the community, I would just say that you have 8 principals in our district that care very, very deeply about every child, and you're very lucky to have them.
Awesome. Yeah,
And they're super cool.
and they're super cool. All right, John Gaspar, comments tonight.
I'd just like to thank everyone that came and talked or sent us emails. I'd like to thank RJAC staff for their hard work here, the Facilities Commission. You guys did a very great job, very well worth it, I hope, and in the future. And Brad, thank you for these last few reports also. So that's all I have.
John Dryden.
Well, it's been an interesting couple of weeks. Thanks to the Facilities Commission and all the people who crunch all that stuff and bring it to us. And, yeah, that's it.
Thanks, John.
Always said it takes a village, apparently it takes a bunch of data as well to make this thing go around. So to echo what I've heard so far, Facilities Commission, thank you for so much giving us that process that we talked about, that measurement. And that's it.
Beautiful. Tina? Chris?
Well, I want to congratulate again the Rotolo cross country team on the girls taking 3rd place in state and the boys taking 1st place in state. It was incredible being there this weekend, and our town is amazing. When we got back, we met at the high school, and the police and fire department escorted the buses and the entire parade of parents across town, honking. People were coming outside. It was an amazing experience, and then we got back to Rotolo. It was Rotolo Palooza, so all the kids who were inside came out. It was unbelievable, and not something that I'll ever forget, and I don't imagine any of the kids or the coaches will forget either. So I was very happy to be a part of it, and I love this community even more now. And then also I want to mention we are in election season. Some people are voting early, and we have an election coming up. I know that our national politics is toxic and that a lot of people are turned off, but know your vote in the community is important. And I don't care how you vote, but we have important votes for our community coming up for home rule. We have important votes coming up for our library and whether or not we want to continue to maintain it. And if you care about what's going on in our community, please get educated on the topics and go out and vote. Your vote is important. People vote in this town by the dozens or hundreds. Your vote matters. Please vote.
All right, awesome. We do have closed session on the agenda tonight, but there is no action to follow. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn to closed session to discuss the collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Gaspar, second by Locke. Can you voice vote?
Yes.
Voice vote? All right, all in favor?
All right.
All right, we'll adjourn to closed session.
We take it.